Right, well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We'll get started. It's 6:30. So thank you very much for coming along on a rather beautiful Suffolk evening. I'm Tim, the PCC, and we've got Gareth Wilson, our Chief Constable, and Jane Herzog, who's in charge of the Bury area. I think that's the correct description. So they'll both be speaking to you after I've just said a few words to get the evening going. Now, this evening is all about yourselves being able to ask any question you like about policing or any other concern you've got in the area. We'll do our very best to answer them here and now. If there's some highly technical or specialised questions that we can't answer now, we will obviously take your details and get back to you. Going around the room, there is a list for which we would love to have your contact details, or it's down here at the moment. So if we haven't got them, please feel free to fill that in at the end. So, I'll probably point at that, it works, that's me. So this is all about engagement this evening. We have a series going around all the districts and boroughs, and I put this up as the first comment. Yes, it's easy to get up here and speak, as old Churchill said, but also it takes quite a lot to sit down and listen, and it's really, really important in this situation that we are here to listen to what you, the public, the taxpayer, businesses have to say, good or bad. So please don't hang back when you have your chance later on. It's really, really important. If we're going to improve things as we move forward, we do get all your views. That's absolutely critical. That's very, very important indeed. Just to quickly recap the role of the Police and Crime Commissioner. Number one, I suppose, you actually are responsible for hiring or firing the Chief Constable. That's why Gareth is here. So that is a major role. So no surprise there. Exactly. So that's a fundamental change as well. And overall, the PCC is responsible for the budget, and with that, of course, goes setting the precept, that part of the council tax you pay for policing. It did go up by a small amount this year. That's the first time in 3 years. I am always very, very wary of putting up the burden of taxation on people. It has been extremely difficult for the last 4 or 5 years for many people, particularly those at the bottom of the pile, and one has to be very mindful of that. Having said that, before we decided to put the precept up, we did an online survey, and we had, I think, nearly 1,600 responses, and 80% of the people who wrote in said they were happy to pay a small amount more, which is the equivalent of about 6p per week. And just so you know, ladies and gentlemen, that increase of just under 2% does actually bring in an extra £832,000 per year from across the whole of Suffolk. So it's quite a sizable amount of money. But I am well aware, as set out in the legislation of PCC, it says it is responsible for making sure we have an efficient and an effective police force. Now in Suffolk, we are very, very lucky. We live and continue to live and do our business and domestic lives in a very low crime area. That's really, really important. It is a tremendous achievement that we have the third lowest cost per head of policing anywhere in England and Wales. Having said all that, we're certainly not complacent. Yes, recorded crime came down by a further 2% last year, but we also need to be very mindful that the pattern of crime is changing, and serious issues such as domestic abuse, other crimes that we put in like antisocial behaviour are not necessarily recorded in the crime data. Hate crime, these sorts of things are really, really important to individuals, and we have to be looking at those very, very seriously. So having an efficient and effective police force is obviously pretty critical here that we do this together. Holding the Chief Constable and the Constabulary to account is part of my role on your behalf. I'm there as the servant, if you like, of the taxpayer and the Suffolk people. And we do that through a series of public meetings, accountability and performance panels, as well as events like this, so they're very, very important indeed. And the other major change that took place last October is the Police and Crime Commissioners in England and Wales are entirely responsible for commissioning victim services. Now that has been a step change. That didn't happen before, where there was one identifiable person in the area, and without showering huge burdens on people, but the Police and Crime Commissioner is a focal point for trying to sort this out. That's not to say we get everything right. Of course there are improvements that we need, but it is a step change that at last victims, be they domestic or businesses, are much more at the centre of the criminal justice system. So that's a big change. So what I'm going to do is whiz around our little jigsaw here and give you a few comments, starting up at the top right-hand corner as I look at it, strategic direction and budget. Just so you know, the budget at the moment is just over £120 million, and the government has set the budget reduction of just over £20 million in the next 5 years. There is actually no cause for alarm. Yes, of course it's going to be challenging and difficult, but we do need to get away from this idea that policing is just about the numbers of people who work in the police service. It isn't. Yes, there's a correlation between numbers, of course I'm not being daft about that, but we have to look at productivity. We need to be much more business-like as an organisation, and we'll be talking later on about investment in technology, how we can become much more productive as a public service. And it is one of the most, if not the most important public service, because if we are not safe and confident in our domestic and business life, we might as well all pack up and go home. It's really, really at the top of the list. There is no disrespect to other public services, of course, but it is pretty fundamental to the way of life we are lucky to have here in Suffolk. Now that budget reduction is at just over 16%, and that does mean it's a reduction year on year of around 3% just over. There are many, many organisations that have to cope with that, and they find ways to do it. If we work together and with public support, good communication and so on, I'm quite confident we can do that. And I would just like to point out there are other facilities, capabilities that are available that don't often get reported. With the changing pattern of crime, we need to understand there are other resources we can bring in, like the National Crime Agency. We had a very successful meeting here in the Athenaeum a couple of months ago. They have a budget of £650 million. We also have the National Counter-Terrorism Network with a budget of £450 million. And one of the other extra resources that we have, which Suffolk contributes to, is the Eastern Region's Special Operations Unit. Now that's really important for dealing with organised crime, cybercrime and other activities. So whilst there's a reduction here in Suffolk with our budget and adjustments being made to transform the police service in Suffolk, Gareth and I are, as one, we are quite confident we can continue to keep the public safe and adapt to the changing circumstances. And we all need to understand the debt burden that this country's got is far too high, and I personally, being the dad of three boys or young men in their early 20s, am very mindful of the burden we're putting on the younger generation and subsequent generations, because all that money's got to be paid back. And I think sometimes too many people don't quite understand that. Now, that's my personal view, and I think therefore we all have to get on with it, roll our shirt sleeves up and sort it out. And Suffolk has a tremendous record of being able to do that. And I think that character that we have is second to none. So, just commenting further on the budget process and the preset, we have actually done that on the basis of ring-fencing money for some new capabilities, like looking at roads policing. I'm going to talk a little bit about a new cybercrime unit. That's had an investment, or will be having an investment of over £300,000. And ring-fencing resources for dealing with some of the more difficult but important areas, such as child sexual exploitation, serious sexual offences, and making sure the economic crime unit has got the resources it needs. I make no apology for that, because if we do not support the private sector and businesses in order to earn the money to employ people and have the tax base, we've got one heck of a problem. And it's really important we're doing what we can, even when times are difficult, to look at that. Sorry, I'm going the wrong way, I should look at that one. So if we look at managing demand, this is a debate that we need to have with other parts of the public sector. On occasions, over a third of police time is spent on dealing with mental health issues. Now, we are not a mental health service, and if we're looking at productivity and efficiency, other parts of the public sector do need to step up to the mark and take their fair share of the burden. If you look at the way local government has transformed itself in the last few years, I think other organisations need to take a leaf out of their book. Their budgets have been cut far more than police, and yet the world has not fallen apart, and we have to find new ways of working. Not easy, I accept that, but we need to move ahead. Neither do we run an ambulance service, nor are we there as a major social and welfare organisation. The Constabulary will always have a 24/7 approach to help anybody who's vulnerable and difficulty, of course, and that should never change. But I do have a difficulty with some organisations, and I use this phrase, cost shunting, putting an extra burden onto policing for the roles that they're not really there to be doing. They're there as a backup, but not taking over some of the mainstream activities. So that's one of the things I hope, as we move forward together, we'll be able to deal with a better allocation of the work and the burden. So managing the demand is really, really critical. Moving on to partnership working, I do think, ladies and gentlemen, that is the key for the future. We've got an excellent track record, you may have read about joint police and fire stations, developing more training schemes together. There's huge potential right across the public sector for joining up procurement, sharing buildings. We've got some good examples of that, not just with fire and rescue but elsewhere. The new Milton Hall Hub project coming up, for example, we are actively engaged with that, where we can have 3 or 4 or more public sector organisations all in one building and so on. I hope the government will mandate that we put blue light services together. The policing minister, Mike Penning, used to be an operational fireman, and he says it makes absolute sense, not just financially, but operationally. The government doesn't need to mandate some things like this so we can actually get on with it. Because sometimes the will might be there, but there's a little bit too much talk and not enough action of getting on with it. And I don't think we've got time with the pressures we've got financially to keep talking about it. We need a lot more action on these things. But of course, developing partnership working means we've been able to attract money from the government. We've got nearly £5 million for the joint work with the fire and police. You may have read right across local government, policing and various dimensions of health. We've got potentially over £5 million for the Transformation Challenge Award. In other words, if we start to put things together in Suffolk and work differently and more effectively, the message from government is you change and we'll help you. If you want to be an ostrich and stick your head in the sand and don't want to change, well, that's fine. It would represent an abdication of leadership and responsibility, both at senior levels in an organisation and politically, but the government is there to help, and we've got to make sure Suffolk takes advantages of these opportunities when they're there. And that's the way I do think we will help ourselves to be able to get through that. So protecting victims and vulnerable people, the big step change of putting victims at the focal point of what we do. And certainly here in Bury, some of the monies that have been awarded through ourselves, if you look at the huge programme on the back of the domestic abuse research that we have had done, there are some absolutely appalling stories in that research that was done, carried out by us for us by University Campus Suffolk. We know 90% of the victims are women, so they're obviously by definition 10% are males, but the barbarity and depraved acts of some so-called civilised people is beyond the pale. When you hear of a woman who's strangled repeatedly and suffocated in front of her children, comes around 4 or 5 times, when you hear of a woman who's beaten up because she dared to go around the corner to buy a pint of milk without asking her other half permission, when children are made to watch sex acts being performed in front of them, abusing or killing the family pet, there are some pretty sick people out there. And that is a huge role, a new role for the constabulary, which is difficult. And we all have a responsibility in society to confront issues like this. It is not just down to the police or just down to individuals or social services. We all have to join up what we're doing together, and we will be able to deal with it. And the reason I'm very keen on dealing with that is because if you imagine children brought up in that atmosphere and they think it's a normal way to behave, they are highly likely, not necessarily, but highly likely to be the offenders of the future. And domestic abuse is relevant to businesses because of absenteeism, the stress, the discomfort, lack of productivity and everything else that goes with it. So it is a major issue, and we're very pleased to have had that piece of research, quite an innovative approach to dealing with it. And yesterday we had our local criminal justice board meeting. I'm delighted that they have endorsed the report, and Gareth and his team are leading the work to come up with an action plan. Had a meeting today, we're going to get it independently verified and hope that we can join in multi-agency and including the key work the voluntary sector does to move forward. And I just want to stop for a minute and talk about the voluntary sector and move on to commissioning and grants. That is one of the really fantastic things about Suffolk. The huge amount of work, be it from Neighbourhood Watch, Women's Aid, Women's Refuge, dealing with those who've perhaps been detained or with criminal records, they're handing more trust than others, to help people rehabilitate themselves and get back into society with a purpose. It's really important we look at that. You look at, for example, the custody suites. the volunteers independent custody visiting. I know we have a person here who's done a lot for that, but I'm mentioning that's another example of where people in Suffolk help each other. And if we did away with the voluntary sector, Suffolk would be a pretty lousy place. Absolutely no question of that. The contribution the voluntary sector makes is absolutely enormous. And the commissioning and grants that we do, I ring-fence £700,000 from the budget to support the voluntary sector. The Safer Suffolk Fund, we would love to get more applications than that from Western Suffolk. That money is there to be used to support the voluntary sector. If you've got an idea, please get in touch with us, however big or small, and we'll do what we can to help. So that's really, really important. That money is there. And I think if you talk to the constabulary, another example, for example, with the biggest funders of the town pastors across Suffolk, the work they do, particularly in the nighttime economy to help keep people safe, is second to none. And there is no doubt that does reduce the demand on the actual policing that is required. So a little bit of money there can pay huge dividends elsewhere, all on the back of people who are kind enough to volunteer their services for nothing. And talking about volunteers, I just want to mention the Special Constabulary. They are true volunteers, they give their time for nothing. Same powers as warranted officers, they are there to support the full-time constabulary, but we have a huge debt that we owe people like that. So very, very important. We do a lot for young people with the grants. You'll have seen some of the cadets looking very, very smart. The way that programme is being rolled out across the county is one of the first things I said when I was fortunate enough and in the privileged position to be elected. We need a programme rolling out across the whole county. We opened a new unit at Sudbury last year, and in June the new unit in Haverhill will be launched. Well, it won't be launched, it will be passing out parade. And that's been done in conjunction with police and fire. So really, really important we do what we can to support our youngsters and give them a purpose in life. That's what it's all about. Innovation, easy to put up there, but please bear in mind we've been very successful at attracting government money, better use of technology, and I'm sure Gareth and Jane will talk about that in a minute. But if you apply the use of technology to improve productivity and make the frontline guys more effective, that is what it's all about. These changes are about preserving the front line. It's really, really important that we do that. So anything we can do to be more efficient and effective in the background, better equipment, and so on, which I'll leave there because Gareth will talk about that, I'm sure, makes a big difference. So again, we need to embrace technology in all sorts of ways. If you think 85% of people in Suffolk under the age of 20, 85% of them have access to a smartphone. Now, I'm not one of these people who wants to sit there fiddling with these contraptions all the time, but as we progress and people use them and get addicted to them, but as we do progress, there can be all sorts of ways of crime prevention, keeping people safe with an intelligent use of technology. It's not going to be this for everybody, but it is an important resource that we mustn't forget. And on the innovation side, I just want to remind you that we do spend quite a lot of money on academic research. A lot of money will be going into evidence-based policing, so you can channel resources in the right way to match demand, as opposed to having a pretty good idea, but perhaps isn't precise enough. So why do we do what we're doing? How do we allocate resources for policing and so on? And that is a new approach. We put a lot of money in there for dealing with that. I've spoken about the domestic abuse research carried out by UCS. They've also just completed a major piece of work up in Lowestoft looking at the use of crystal meths, a particularly poisonous addictive drug. I have a loathing of the drugs culture, I really do. I've seen the causes, the effects it's had on other people, the way it breaks up families, ruins societies, and I'm 110% behind sorting out this curse on society. It has to be tackled. Because if you don't deal with that, these people, organised crime, will merely move on to other things. We have to confront it. They are hell-bent on just making money out of other people's misfortune and misery. They are pretty evil people, in my view. So again, supporting the constabulary for getting stuck into these jokers is really, really important. New forms of crime, well, I think I've touched on that. The new cybercrime unit we're launching, based in Suffolk up at Halesworth, an investment of over £300,000 of yours and my money, will enable the constabulary to confront the changing pattern. So much more crime is now done online in the privacy of of an office or a bedroom. and yet it doesn't really get reported. The cost of fraud, child sexual exploitation, it beggars belief. You can stick your credit card into wherever these websites are. For 10 quid you can watch live streaming of sexual abuse, rape or anything else of children somewhere in the world. I'm not saying that happens here, but we do have to be vigilant and be very careful. It is horrendous. 10 quid and a credit card and a computer and the internet. These people have got to be found and we've got to get after them. But of course it's new, it's different, so very happy to support the investment going into things like that. Financial fraud costs all of us. Credit card fraud, I bet lots of us have been victims of that. Email scams. The abuse of social media. Coming back with a smartphone, damn good things, but they can be a curse as well. And that means we have to look at new ways of dealing with it. Serious sexual offences, human trafficking, domestic servitude, slavery, call it what you like, does happen in Suffolk. We've got to be more careful with our borders. You've probably read in the press not long ago of that Ukrainian bloke who landed at Orford. I think he admitted to 7 journeys. No doubt that was about half of what he'd actually done. 100,000 quid each time he comes over, importing, if you like, crude term, people, illegal immigration, just making money out of it. And very often the people who come over who are exploited are in a very vulnerable position. So we've got to be looking at things like that. And then I suppose the last thing is about preventing and reducing crime. And I think that's where we all have a responsibility. We will do what we can from our organisation, support schemes like Neighbourhood Watch, Farm Watch, working with community safety partnerships, whatever it happens to be, to help keep us safe. And it's really important those organisations are supported and volunteers come forward and help run them. The police cannot do everything on their own. We all have a responsibility. It was one of Robert Peel's initial, one of his principles, the public are the police and the police are the public. So we have to join in and help each other, and that is the way forward. Putting money into things like integrated offender management. I believe in giving people a second chance, but not a third, fourth, fifth, and sixth chance. And sometimes with individuals you need a big carrot and a big stick. Many of these people who come from a very, very difficult background have no parental role models, never had an education, probably been unemployed, suffer from addiction to alcohol and drugs, domestic abuse, violence, gangs, whatever it is. I do know, having employed people like that in the past, you can turn their lives around. Where there's that opportunity, and there is hope in a decent, tolerant society, we have to do it. It is difficult, but believe you me, when you have people under the age of 30 with 7 or 8 custodial sentences, it suggests to me the system isn't quite working. We need to find a different way. And that's not to say there doesn't need to be retribution, of course there does. People need to understand the difference between right and wrong. And maybe in society that's where we perhaps go wrong with some of our youngsters. Do they actually know the difference of right and wrong and where the boundaries are? So there's a lot there for us to do. So I'll leave it at that. That's the introduction. We'll look forward to your questions later. And now I'll hand over to Gary.
Thanks, Tim. Right. Okay, there are a few things that I'll go over that Tim has, but I'll go in a little bit more depth on the operational side of it. But before I do, I guess it's to describe what my role is, because my role, quite simply, is to look at Tim's policing crime plan and look how I can implement it across the whole organisation and deliver the objectives that were set within there. So, where do we stand? If you look at the policing challenges, I guess it's very easy to start with what are the savings that we have to try and find, and I will cover that because I think it's important. But I also think it's really important to look at some of the aspects that Tim has raised as well, particularly around the changing crime types, particularly around the history, particularly around how we as an organisation have already risen to the challenge and have delivered significant changes to our organisation with significant savings, but at the end of it, we're actually still producing a service which, on the whole, provides a good service to the communities of Suffolk. So let's just start with the savings. Between now and 2020, we've got to find about £20.5 million. Now, within our savings plans that we've got, we do have the work that we're doing inside the organisation. We're doing the work that we've got collaboratively with Norfolk, but we've also got the work in enhancing our capability to deal with some of the more expensive specialist assets with the Eastern Region Specialist Operations Unit. Those things are things like surveillance. Now, if you can imagine, the cost of a police officer walking around Bury is fairly expensive because of all the on-costs we have, all the training, the equipment, but the more expensive assets are those that have to deal with the higher end of policing. Those who, for example, have to sit in sometimes a very expensive car to do surveillance that has to be particularly fast, that has to have certain communications equipment in it that villains can't listen into, that has various bits of wizardry that assist us in terms of the job that we perform. So it is only right that we look at the whole region and how we work with them, and that we say, well, we need this, and we do need it in Suffolk. We don't have that much of a threat from organised crime groups, but we do have some. So it makes sense that we go in with the 6 forces in the Eastern Region to actually deliver that better, more specialist service. The money that's left for us to identify is around about £5 million after we've taken all of that into account. And we are convinced that we can still produce that and produce a decent service for the communities of Suffolk. I think in previous meetings I've kind of likened this to what happened to the car industry in the UK, where many years ago we had a car industry that was really good, and that there wasn't the innovation there wasn't the development of how we worked, the equipment that we used, and as a consequence of all of that, it's taken years for the British car industry to get back up to the level that it is now, producing the cars that it can. And a lot of people are examining the police service at the moment and are saying, you can't do what you've done before because you haven't got as much money and you haven't got the same equipment and same people. What I'm saying is, if you go through some of these aspects, I'll go through them in more detail later on. For example, technological innovation. A few years ago, it would have been that the officers out on the street would have had to go through and personally radio in every single index number of a car that drove past that they wanted to have a look at. We've now got equipment that sits at key strategic locations on the road network that will look at thousands of number plates every day and will notify control rooms that you've got somebody driving through who's wanted, somebody who's driving through who has no insurance, no tax, that there's information about, that it's good to know where they are, and also it logs the information for a set period of time, which means that we can go back and have a look at a particular area if a particularly horrendous crime has been committed. So you cannot look at how policing is going to look in the future and only compare it with the past, because we can change radically. And I'll just go through a few of those things now. We've talked in terms of the organisation's development, and we have already adapted to that changing crime type. I've talked before at other meetings and said, in years gone by, we had to produce an operational order and significant officers to sit and police the nighttime economy. Well, actually, the violence, that face-to-face violence, has gone down. So is it right that we continue to police it at that level, or is it not right, and is there something else that we can do? But at the same time, we have got to police those people who sit in their bedrooms and who are vulnerable to attacks from people who may be on the other side of the world. So, for example, you may have somebody, as Tim has said, who is a perpetrator that lives in our county and wants to sit there and look at stuff on the internet they shouldn't be looking at. We need to be able to apprehend them. But at the same time, and we've done the poll straw before, I've been subject to credit card fraud through the internet. I'm sure people have been in here as well. And it's quite right that we make sure our officers are equipped to deal with, and also there's a resource to be able to deal with those things that happen behind closed doors. It has got to be right that officers who have to go and deal with Facebook bullying have the ability to be able to investigate it and deal with it online. We also need to be able to make sure that we are able to communicate with people who use social media but don't particularly want to talk to us. So we need to make sure that as an organisation we can actually adapt and innovate to be able to talk to people in a way that hitherto hasn't been possible. But the core of the organisation's development has still got to be through locality-based policing. There's a lot of stuff that's been in the press over the past couple of days around safer neighbourhood teams and the demise of the safer neighbourhood team. Within Suffolk, as the change programme goes forward, neighbourhoods, localities, these closed spaces in terms of where we all live, are going to be at the core of the policing model that we are going to have. So we are going to find ways of making sure we can continue to police local areas with local officers and staff from across the public sector, and I'll go into that in a little bit more detail later on. So if we've got fewer staff, but we're finding better ways for them to work, we also need to look at our ability to reduce the demand that comes into the organisation. Less demand means that those people that are left behind can deal with things more effectively. And there's a lot that we can do there. Every day we get around about 700-800 calls for service into the organisation, and a couple of hundred of those are people who simply ring us up and ask us a question. Now we know that our website is not the best, and we know that people who go onto it to have a look for an answer to a question can't get it. They then call into the police station, they then take a call, the operator dealing with it sits there and thinks, well, I can't answer that, so I'll push it through to the control room. The control room then look at it and think, well, the best thing we can do is allocate an officer or a PCSO to be able to go and deal with this. And that can't be right. There's got to be a way that if you want to go out and find out an answer to a question, you log onto our internet or you call our organisation and we can give you the answer there and then. We have operators that have a bank of answers. We have the ability, if people do want to log onto the internet, to be able to say, this is what you've got to do in this particular circumstance. IOM is really important, and there's significant evidence to say that people who are prolific offenders do clean themselves up and get a new start in life through having that extra little bit of care around what we are doing with them and what our other partners are doing with them to make sure they can go into employment or make sure they can have some form of housing, to take them off of that merry-go-round of just continual crime, prison, continual crime, prison, which costs an awful lot of money, but which actually clearly in some circumstances is not working. Evidence-based policing was discussed as well. So if we're going to reduce demand on the organisation and we're going to have the technology to be able to make us do things more efficiently, evidence-based policing is all about making sure that we do the right thing with the staff that we have. And I go back to the origin of evidence-based practice, and this was where the health service, or before the health service, through medicine, doctors used to do what they believed was right, not which they knew was right. And an awful lot of work was done, particularly around smallpox, around vaccinations that came through, to say this works, this doesn't. And all doctors changed to using the new way of working with the new vaccine, and simply less people died. Now you can take that methodology and put that into policing very, very easily, because experiments have been done where me, and I can say as I was sitting there as an inspector, I would say if we had a particular crime problem, put loads of officers down there in fluorescent jackets and it will stop things. Well, significant scientific work's been done to say you get as much payback by putting the officers in fluorescent jackets for 10 minutes out of 2 hours, as opposed to 2 hours out of 2 hours. Now, if you use that and you do that, and you know, Tim has invested in this evidence-based practice for us, and we're working with universities to do it, we are better able to make sure that our staff that are here do the right thing with the time that they have available. Technological innovation is really, really important. We've mentioned AMPR. There's just 3 other systems that I just want to go through today. The first is mobile working, and I think if the officers were involved in the first iteration of mobile working, it wasn't very good. So we had a mobile working system that we put out where if you went into a rural area and you'd got something on the computer you're working on, the signal dropped out, you lost everything. Pretty fair, isn't it? So now we've challenged some of the security measures that we've been told we've got to have. We've still got absolute confidence in our security of our system, but we've allowed that mobile working to develop to enable officers to go out and write a statement and deal with things on a computer, have access to the network, have enhanced Wi-Fi that sits on their vehicles and that is better for them. Now, the reason I mention that is because policing has evolved over many years, and what's happened is that as computer systems have come in, officers have gone out to deal with things, and they've had what we call the elastic band effect back into the police station. They deal with something, they have to go back in, they have to deal with it on the computer that's there because they haven't got a mobile device, and you can see the inefficiency of how that works. So now with the new method of mobile working, it means that officers can actually go out and about and do their job and stay out and about in the community where we want them to be. We've also got a system called Athena that's going to come in, and that will mean for the first time we have a joined up system with 7 forces, all those in the eastern region plus Kent as well, and others are looking to join on to our system, which will give us access to all the information of people that go into custody wherever they are, all the people that have been subject of intelligence reports and incidents as well. So if you look at it from that point of view, for the first time we've got access to really decent information, which will mean that our staff can go out and they can operate effectively with a better bank of information. It allows them to be able to detect things more easily and identify who somebody is more easily as well. The final one, in terms of a technological innovation, is around a system which is about dealing with our support functions. What's really important is that we allow a majority of the investment to be put into those staff that have face-to-face contact with the public. It isn't right that we are not efficient in terms of how we deliver finance, how we deliver HR, etc. So this system that we have brought in means that the officers do have to do more work themselves, and it's going through its teething processes at the moment, but the staff have to do more work themselves. The information is more accessible to senior staff and junior staff as well, so it automatically draws out a lot of the information that we require, and as a consequence of that, the amount of staff that are sitting behind the system doing the administrative tasks can be reduced. That can only be right because as somebody leading this organisation, my whole emphasis has got to be on ensuring that Suffolk remains that really safe place for us to live, work and travel and invest. The final bullet point is around supporting the response to the demands placed upon the whole of the public sector in Suffolk. I talk about sort of various silos, and if you think of the columns out the front of a sort of like a Roman building, you can see how social services might work, education might work, how policing might work, how health might work, and we all work in our own little column, our own little silo. We also have to deal with the same people day in, day out. That cannot be right that so many different agencies have so much contact with those people that we share an interest in. Some really exciting work's currently being undertaken and is funded by central government through a transformational challenge award bid. So we've got multi-million pound investment from central government that looks at how the whole of the public service within Suffolk can work better together to provide solutions for those people that live in Suffolk. And that can only be right, because if we look at just policing by itself and we keep to policing by itself, we will not be able to work in the future in the same way as we have. If we are able to, and I've got every confidence through speaking to the senior executives in other public sector departments around the county, if we are able to better develop joined up service that seamless service between all the different agencies, we will become so much more efficient and effective. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much, Gareth. We're now going to move on to the final one, looking at the context in the St Edmundsbury borough. So I'm going to hand it to Jane.
Thank you.
There we go.
Hello, I'm Jane Herzog. I'm a local policing inspector, so my area of responsibility is the policing for Bury St Edmunds and also 53 of the parishes that surround it. So firstly, this is just a snapshot of what we're doing, what's happening on a local basis. So as far as the performance overview, these figures are based on a 3-year rolling average, which is up to the end of the financial year of the 31st of March. Within domestic burglary, the solve rate is currently at 29%, which is up 8% on the 3-year average. Antisocial behaviour incidents are down 30%, with 2,860 reported incidents last year, compared with an average of 4,083. On the downside, domestic burglary offences are continuing to rise and have risen 8% to 210 in the last year, which is compared to 195 on the 3-year average. When you're looking at local issues, as I say, domestic burglary is a big concern for us. There continues to be a rise in domestic burglary across the area, but we do need to remember that it's a small number of people committing a large number of offences. We've got several suspects, and some of them are part of organised crime groups who travel from all over the country to offend in our area. We've got different styles of offending. There are people committing walk-in burglaries, which are insecurities of dwelling houses, where they're just walking in and stealing money, purses and such like. And there's also variance in the items that are being stolen. We're currently undertaking a high level of proactivity. We've got a large number of targeted patrols. We're looking at targeted hardening, making people aware about keeping their premises secure, crime prevention advice, and also encouraging the public to report suspicious behaviour. We need to know what's happening at the time it's happening in order for us to get a chance to catch these people. We currently have one person on bail for a series of walk-in burglaries across the town. We're looking at a series of possibly around 30 there, so hopefully we'll have some good news from that. We've got 2 people on bail for rural burglaries where they've broken doors and windows. And we even had officers down in Dorset last week who were interviewing suspects who are believed to be part of an organised gang covering the wider area of rural Suffolk. One of the issues that is constantly coming up across the town is in relation to parking. Certainly when we've had our tasking meetings, I think we can say that generally always comes up. When you're looking at the people who are responsible for handing out the parking tickets, that's part of my Safer Neighbourhood team. That is a very small team, where on a day-to-day basis you'll have one PC and one PCSO on for the town centre. That's what we're working with. We work with highways to look at the areas where there are the most complaints, and we're issuing around 100 tickets every month in relation to the parking issues, but it isn't really having much effect on the overall problems within the town centre. Sorry. What we are looking at is speaking with the council to deal with the deregulation of parking issues. Within Suffolk, there are 327 councils in England, and of those, only 25 are not designated areas. What that means, the responsibility for dealing with the parking goes to the council, and they employ specific parking wardens. So yes, there's 25 that are not designated, and 6 of those areas are in Suffolk. So that's something that we're working on to address the parking issues, but taking the matter away from the police. The third issue that raises, of course, there's issues within the rural community is hare coursing. This is regularly raised as a priority in rural areas. The hare coursing damages crops, but also the offenders, landowners are being intimidated and threatened by the people doing it. Sorry, I've got a cold. The offenders also travel great distances, specifically to hare coursing in East Anglia because of the, I think it's the terrain and such, isn't it? We've currently got successful convictions for 2 groups and in fined at court and more cases pending. And I think that in itself has sent out a message to other people who commit these offences and we have had an overall reduction. Things that are working within our area. The Antisocial Behaviour and Crime Policing Act of 2014 brought in criminal behaviour orders and community protection notices. And these replace what was traditionally known as ASBOs, antisocial behaviour orders. The really positive thing about this is whereas an antisocial behaviour order prevented somebody from doing something, these new orders allow us to enforce somebody to do something, so to attend a programme for rehabilitation of some kind. Currently we're using those very proactively across St Edmundsbury, dealing with prolific shoplifters and antisocial behaviour issues. So that's an area of growth, and it's a really positive bit of legislation that we're making use of. Another area that has recently been set up is the operational partnership team. And this is a progression really of the Safer Neighbourhood team. With the reduction in Safer Neighbourhood team numbers, there's been a big drive to reduce demand on policing services and looking at long-term sustainable solutions to problems. So we've got within the OPT, Operational Partnership Team, we have people working within youth offending. We've got a team called the 180 team, which is to try and turn people from their behaviour. It works specifically with persistent and prolific offenders for the high level of positive crime. And we have antisocial behaviour officers who are working on a weekly basis to discuss the issues with partnership to try and reduce the antisocial behaviour problems. We've got officers who are specific to working within children's homes. So we're looking at people who go regularly missing or causing problems within the children's homes. By having that specific link, that is improving the service that's provided and reducing reports to police. We've also got people within the mental health services, working with the hospital to reduce the number of people reported missing from there. And that in itself, we're also looking at a joined up approach with the mental health services, the ambulance service, A&E and the police, so that people who are coming to notice within all of those organisations, we're able to have a discussion to see how we can best provide a service for them and prevent that happening. The other area of work I just wanted to mention, as Tim's already mentioned, is in relation to the specials and the cadets. And it'd be wrong of me not to mention the good work that they themselves carry out. Specials are volunteers. They sign up to do a minimum of 18 hours a week, a month. Otherwise they're not going to all the time. And certainly in the,
Some do.
certainly in the West we have an annual assembly of the specials, and certainly in the West a lot of our specials are winning lots of awards for their attendance and also some of the work that they're undertaking. We have a special support team who are fully trained to carry out rapid intervention, searching evidence, gathering and preparing handovers, and they every week will carry out a warrant, normally a drugs warrant, somewhere in the West. And we've also recently launched, Al over there has launched the specials shoplifting team, and they now come out on a regular basis. We've got them some high visible bicycles, and they'll be actively working across the town centre when we're looking at people who are involved in purse snatching and such like that. The cadets who you may have seen, who showed you to your seats, that again is a voluntary organisation, and my officers are volunteering to provide the staffing to work with them. They're groups of 14 to 18 year olds, and obviously they're there to learn about policing. They get involved in litter picks, parades, and other campaigns. We've also just recently signed them up to the Duke of Edinburgh Awards scheme. So it's a really good opportunity to teach them discipline, community awareness, teamwork and responsibility. So that's another really good area of work in Bury St Edmunds.
Right, thank you very much, Jane. I'll take the gadget. So now it's over to you. Now I've got to turn this thing off. So, magic. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's now over to you to ask whatever question you'd like. Just a quick one whilst you think about that. Dealing with hair coursing is really, really important. Did you know that 99% of hair coursers have a previous criminal conviction? They're damnably unpleasant people. We don't want them in Suffolk. And the reason we put extra resources in and set up a properly equipped rural crime team with a decent vehicle, a Land Rover, and ANPRs to send the message out: if you want to come and mess about in Suffolk, we're going to make your life uncomfortable and unpleasant, so don't come here. Preferably behave yourself and don't go anywhere, etc. So there we are. I don't know how this thing. That's what just want to leave it. Oh, is that one there? Is it? Right. Ah, good. So who would like to ask the question first? Hello.
So I'm just going to get a coffee while I'm
You do that. So too, if you like. Who'd like to ask the first question? Gentleman here, please.
Well, I do have a question. But I mean, let me thank you first of all for the overall picture. I think you've given a very interesting picture. It puts my question a bit into perspective. But I'm going to ask you a question about the Harassment Act 1997. Okay, being warned, I would like to explain to you what happened first, very, very briefly, but then I'm going to ask you a very specific question about it. Okay? Well, I was on the receiving end of some of your policing at the end of last year. What happened was that a woman in Stowmarket, where I live, made a complaint about me. Two officers took that up under the Harassment Act. They came to my place, they made some allegations, and they left me with a written warning. Now, I'm all in favour of the police warning people that are in danger of breaking the law, provided that it's right, but in this case it wasn't. What the two officers did was they cobbled together some allegations, two of them, which purported to show a course of action, which is what you have to show with this act. There were two things. One was a letter, which I thought they interpreted in a very biased way, but so be it. But the other one was the one that upset me. They claimed that I was watching the woman's house, which was factually untrue. It was a complete lie. Now, what actually happened was that it was a goodwill gesture on my part that fell completely flat. The reason why the woman went to the police was that she didn't want any contact with me whatsoever. It wasn't that the contact, but the contact was not made in any devious way as if I was stalking the woman. It was just purely what would happen in a small town like Suffolk. Now, I got very upset about this, and I'm still very upset about it actually. And I made a complaint about it, and a Sergeant Eves from Stowmarket came round and he dealt with the complaint. While he was there, I asked him, I said, "Did you take a written statement?" "No." I said, "Did you ask the woman why she felt she was being watched?" "No." I had printed off some guidelines that were published on the internet about how to deal with this, actually one by Suffolk, one by Wiltshire, and I showed him these guidelines, and he said, "Well, we don't use those guidelines." And he was quite adamant that the way his officers had dealt with the matter was in line with the guidelines that they were given. Okay? Now, my question to you is, first of all, who gives the officers the guidelines? I mean, is it you, for example? The second is, are you happy with the way that this Harassment Act is being used in Suffolk? Do you think that the procedures are rigorous enough? Because what it seems to me is that you are creating a situation for a vindictive person to tell lies about somebody else.
Just before I get Gareth to answer that, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to explain something I forgot to mention at the beginning. The constabulary, the chief constable, has complete operational independence, so I can't go up to Gareth and say, well, go and arrest this person or that person, because I don't like them, really like that. And that's quite right. A lot of people worry that police and crime commission start directing that. So that's set out in the legislation, operational independence. Now, whatever the rights and wrongs of this case, and I'm not for a moment saying...
No, you can't comment.
I'm not, but what I just want to illustrate
No,
is, if someone has an issue at a general point of that and they are dissatisfied with that, one of the roles I have is to act in the public interest. So I've got my card, so if anybody wants to get in touch with the team or myself, you can always write in or call us, and then I can talk to Gareth or the constabulary. It could be a very minor issue, a major issue, it doesn't matter. That is part of the key role of the Police and Crime Commission, to act as that link between the public, to maintain public trust and confidence. And when on occasion things go wrong, we can try and work together to put it right. But that is a key role. Very important you understand this concept of operational independence. So, Gareth, please deal with the gentleman's.
I think there's a couple of points, and I know you don't want to go into the ins and outs of it, but what I will say is we've had this at several public meetings now, where people have come up with specific issues that have been about them, and I don't know the full circumstances.
No, I'm not asking you to comment.
But the offer is, actually, as with everybody else, if you do have concern over how you've been treated, Tim knows that actually I will look at each of those cases. I am looking at each of those cases. Well, up to the offer to you is actually you can contact our office and we will look through it individually. To your specific questions now, we as constables, sworn constables, work to the law of the land. What Parliament says, and that the Act that Parliament brings out, is how we have to work. However, locally, there will be policies that we will put into place that will go through that legislation. We don't deviate from that legislation, but which provides officers guidance in relation to how we as an organisation want them to be implemented. Talking more broadly about my satisfaction around the Harassment Act, I do not feel, from every bit of correspondence that I have, that there is an endemic problem with how we deal with protection from harassment and notices that are giving out. My personal belief is it is quite right where somebody says that they are subject of harassment, and not talking about your case, but my expectation is there'll be some investigation around that to see if it stacks up. But it's quite right at that stage we do bring that to the attention of the person that is being complained about. Because if we didn't, we'd be not only failing the person that we've gone to see, but also failing to notify the person that that particular behaviour or whatever had happened may constitute harassment, and as a consequence, if it carried on, the argument could be, well, if you'd told me about it, I could have rectified my behaviour. I'm not talking about your specific case, I'm talking about more broadly. But in terms of your own particular case, the invite is there. Please feel free to contact me and I will have somebody have a look at those circumstances, and then I'll feel satisfied, or I'll believe I need to have a look at it in a bit more detail.
Could I just come back?
Yes, of course.
As I say, one of the things was that I felt that it should have been more rigorous. You know, that you just, it seemed to me as if you were taking what the person said at total face value.
And this is where
you then passed on,
yeah.
Okay, she felt that she was being watched apparently, but what was the evidence? You know,
but this is now the difficulty I have, because you've told me I don't want to look at that particular case, so I can't. I don't know is the answer. The question you asked me was, do I believe that there's a problem across Suffolk with the implementation of harassment? And the answer is, I do not get a disproportionate amount of complaints, a disproportionate amount of correspondence about people feeling dissatisfied. But the offer is there. I will have a look at it for you if you give me your details, and I'll have a look to see if I'm satisfied that they've followed due process.
Okay, but thank you for raising that very important point. And ladies and gentlemen, here are the cards. Should you need one, who would like to go?
Can I make a
Yes.
general criticism initially?
Of course.
We had 3 very in-depth and long presentations. Can I suggest it might have been better had we been able to ask questions, a short question session after each one? Because trying now to think back to what you said
Right.
I can't remember all the detail, and I just wonder if we could have had a short session on each one and then an all-round session at the end. We might get the picture and remember exactly what was said.
I suppose the downside of that might be, of course, that you might ask a question that I want to cover in a couple of minutes' time.
Yeah,
but I understand what you're saying. I really understand what you're saying. Yeah.
In that case, you can easily just say, okay, well, I'll cover that in the next bit.
We'll take that forward. That's a perfectly reasonable suggestion.
But on that line, I think it was in your presentation. You were talking about how policing has changed, and it has necessarily changed because of the financial constraints. And one of the reasons, or one of the main objectives, basic objectives of the police is to prevent crime and then detect and deter crime. Because I am as old as I look, truly.
43.
Ish. You shouldn't be driving with eyesight that bad. And I know we can never go back to it, but a visible police presence in the old days was something that made people feel safe. Now I accept the statistics, and I accept that Suffolk is a very safe county in general terms, but I'm not entirely sure that all of the population of Suffolk always feel as safe today as they used to feel. And we can fire statistics at people, but if they don't feel safe, then there's this inner feeling that comes through. And I think Jane mentioned the fact that, for example, burglaries, house burglaries, it's something which upsets people, it's something which has a lasting effect. It's got nothing to do with the value. It's got the fact that your castle, your private place has been violated. Yes. Even if it's just a broken window. But there is a problem. The numbers are up, and yet you were saying, I think, that only about 30% of the crimes are solved. That means that 70% of them aren't. And that's the problem, that there is this feeling that things happen, and people don't always feel safe, even though theoretically they are safe. And the other thing, and just finishing it up, and I think you said, and I may have got hold of the wrong end of the stick, when you said that crime numbers were down, did you also say that antisocial behaviour was not now part of the crime statistics?
I did, yeah.
And it seems to me that if crime numbers are going down and you take some of the things out of the matrix, then crime numbers will go down.
Quite.
And then it seems to me that somebody sitting in Parliament will say, oh, the crime numbers have gone down in Suffolk, let's take another 10% away from their funding.
Right. Okay.
And, and it just comes down to this basic concept of not am I safe, but do I feel safe?
Right. I think you raised some very, very good points there, and let me try and answer it as follows. People's perceptions are what they think, by definition. So there's no good anybody standing up here and saying they're wrong, because if that's what people feel, that's what they feel. And there's nothing else to discuss on that. So what we have to do as a community is to do what we can to reassure people, prevent crime in the first place. I mentioned about the voluntary sector. The visible police presence comes up at all our public meetings. That's one of the reasons we're having these, and that's why it's so good for people to come along and raise these issues. So I think going forward, there is a balance to be struck about the new forms of crime, where you don't need necessarily the physical presence of someone walking down the street, but I'm in no way diminishing the appalling effects of a burglary. As you say, your property is defiled. I've had stuff sold off the farm and all sorts of things. Not fortunately having a break into the house, but I know what it's like just in the yard when that happens. I've had 4 or 5 of those instances. I've had my some Olympic tickets, credit card fraud, so I do understand what happens there. So we have to get the balance right, and I think what I was trying to say earlier is that when you look at statistics, recorded crime figures give part of the story. I'm not one of these people who thinks up the statistics this and that's the end of it. We know from the crime survey of England and Wales that roughly half of crime only is recorded. I don't think antisocial behaviour has ever been actually included in the specific crime data in the first place, but it is described as an incident. So you can split hairs, but it's still very, very important to people. I mean, speeding, is it a crime? In certain cases, of course it is, yes. Where do you draw the line? That comes up at every meeting. Parking, is it a civil offence or not? We need to sort this out in Suffolk, local authorities. I'm a district councillor as well. We've got to step up to the mark and make sure we're doing our fair share, etc. I'm sure there are ways through this. So getting the feedback from people like yourselves is critical. I'm always very, very clear. And I said at the beginning, recorded crime has fallen. Compared with other forces and so on, we are comparing like with like, that's fine, but it is only part of the story. I'm not going around saying all crime has fallen, because it hasn't. And I will not do that. And I've been very, very careful since I was first elected to make that clear. So it's like old George Bernard Shaw, lies, lies and damn statistics. I'm honestly not in that school at all. That is some background information, and to be fair to Jane, there's a problem with burglaries going up. That wasn't hidden away. Jane could have picked other statistics. You wouldn't even have seen it. So I think we have to be completely open and honest about that. That's really, really important. And I would be failing in my duty to you if I didn't hold you to account to look at all these things. So going forwards, the Safer Neighbourhood team concept is here to stay. I do not agree with the Police Federation that Bobby's on the beat, or I don't like becoming an extinct species. That's where the leadership, the balanced allocation of resources needs to be looked at. We need to be far more businesslike. There are various things that we are looking at through an in-depth budgetary process, without going into details to bore people, looking genuinely at every penny that we spend to make sure we are more effective. Looking at, if you like, internal things such as fitness, absentee rates, restricted recuperative duties. The vast majority of all police officers, PCSOs, specials, the 2,500 people who work for the constabulary are damn good people. We have to make sure that everybody is at that level as far as we possibly can. And I know that we're all at one on that. So it's complicated. Yes, we've got budgetary restraints, but please remember, part of it is about how we make the guys at the front line more productive. Better use of technology, as Gareth has said, is really, really important, so that we don't end up running backwards and forwards to a police station filling in bits of paper and all these sorts of things. I've talked about the other parts of the public sector doing their fair share. That will make the police officers more productive. And one of the other things about, if you like, the deterrent of crime, Gareth said earlier, a very important point, the police are there to apply the law. Whatever they think personally about whether it's a good, a bad, sensible or silly law, they have to uphold it regardless. That's where I can come and help. If we think laws need to be changed or amended, PCCs can get together and we can see what we can do with Parliament and change that. And the other thing on that, in order to support the constabulary, I think there is an issue in this country, and it came up at our public meeting on Tuesday, about some of the sentences that are handed out for various crimes. We need to make sure that the guidelines are changed and are more appropriate as crime changes and time progresses. And part of the problem in this country, it seems to take forever and a day to change the sentencing guidelines that judges and magistrates have to adhere to. It doesn't always support these guys. There is huge frustration if you get a successful prosecution. For example, I don't know, let's say take a serious drug lord or somebody like that, who maybe gets 7 to 8 years. I think the guidelines should be widened because of the evil approach they've taken and sinister. They know what they're doing, they're clever people, and I'm not sure that the public gets the retribution, and I'm not trying to be vindictive, that it should have, but it also needs to support these guys. So there's a complication there that needs to be sorted. But this balance of all these things is really, really important, and we're trying to get the balance right. So, Gareth, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Just a couple of bits, if I may. First of all, the organisation has moved on from just crime statistics. If you'd looked at it 4 years ago, it would have been, you sit down and you go through it. They're really good as indicators, and when I go before Tim, the accountability and performance panel, he doesn't say, what's that figure? He said, what does this mean? So we have to have a look at it and how it goes. The one thing I do pay a lot of attention to is the British Crime Survey, because that's actually completely independent, it's statistically relevant, and there's nobody there who sort of can skew any data from any interpretation. The other thing is you mentioned about feeling safe, and I'm really pleased that Tim discussed the mobile working, because that's exactly what we want to do. We don't want people in the police station. That doesn't make you feel safe. You know, this is a completely different way of working where we've had to literally go back and go back and go back to feed a system, and that's not right. And my commitment is to you in terms of your answer is part of Tim's plan is around investment in Suffolk, and by investment in Suffolk, we make it a more prosperous place for everybody to live. You know, we draw in all of that money, all those companies, and it's not just the crime statistics, because it's actually, does my employee feel safe in this particular area? So it's just to reinforce really what Tim is saying, and the reason why it's important. It's important people feel safe, but it's also important for me to achieve what's been set out for me to deliver from the Police and Crime Plan.
And you know, dealing with perceptions, that's why these meetings I'll if I can fit it in the day, I will go and talk to any group, because I need to hear what people's concerns are. And sometimes people need to, I'm not just saying get it off their chest, but they need to feel that somebody has listened and is able to try and adjust it. For example, we had an issue in Leyston the other day about lorries thundering through the town. They shouldn't be doing it. So we're now taking that forward. We're responding exactly to what local people have said, and we'll get it sorted. So that's
Can I just come back on one other thing, with this idea of feeling safe. This is what I felt was one of the problems with this woman. She didn't feel safe. Yeah. And when she went to the police, I felt they should have reassured her. You know, it's a bit like going to a doctor and saying you've got a problem with your heart. If the doctor says yes you have, you don't come out feeling better. Yeah. And this is effectively what the police did. You know, she said this man's a pervert, and the police said yes he is. Didn't they? Because they came round and they accused me of stalking her. So they effectively made her feel, I would say, less safe than she was. I mean, they should have said, you know, what a wonderful person I am, and that I wouldn't have dared to have done anything of the sort. And it would have, you know, boosted her confidence. That's what I think.
And that's where, as you rightly say, perceptions, if that's what's people, and we have to continue to work hard to try and deal with those perceptions, and that's why engagement far more.
I once lived in Colchester. I lived next door to a couple that started off, she started living with a security guard, and then they bought an Alsatian, and then they bought 2 Alsatians. Yeah. And you asked her why, and she said because she was afraid of being burgled. Well, we were never burgled in that area. You know, what the hell was wrong with them?
And you will get some people, you know, well, and again, you know, people have different issues, and Okay, but thank you for raising that. It's a very, very important point. And all these things, we note down what the questions are, and we try to incorporate them in the way we move forwards.
Just to finish one, I am surprised, and I'm totally continually surprised, that parking is part of the police. Well, I thought, you know, that really should be County Council.
We've got
St Edmundsbury.
Well, Ipswich Borough Council do their parking enforcement. They have done for several years.
Used to, didn't they?
Well, I don't know. We've got to get this sorted, actually.
The yellow are the only councils in the country that are still, or the areas still undertaken by the police.
Suffolk is.
Have a look at Suffolk.
Yeah. We will. I can assure I'll take it forward. Yeah.
It's something we're negotiating at the moment with local.
But the other thing and just thinking back to something you said, and I think this is what you said, I'm surprised that this computerised system of spreading information and the PC able to get hold of information on something, it appeared to me that what you were saying was that you said it was there in East Anglia and Kent wanted to come in and wanted to others. But it seems to me in this day and age that it's wrong for individual areas to want to opt in. It should be something that if somebody in Liverpool wants to find out about
we're going to violently agree on this one.
A jewellery placed in Bury, they should.
They can do. There are methods that can be used, but they're not wholly efficient. I completely agree with you, and it's a point that we've been making to you know, nationally, that it is really important that the police have systems which are relevant to each other. We do have systems. We have, you know, Police National Computer, following SOAM, you know, the issues around that. We have access to bits of information about people to make sure that we can safeguard people that are going to work with children or vulnerable people. You know, so there are a number of national systems. I completely agree with you though. why is it that 7 forces have got together and chosen one system, and a dozen forces have got together and chosen another system, and those systems don't talk to each other? I agree with you. I completely agree with you. The government have got an IT company that have done that, which is looking at trying to address this issue. But I completely agree with you.
I think the difficulty was I joined this sort of Suffolk 26 years ago, and at that time we were one of only 3 forces in the whole of the country that had a computerised system, which was our crime recording system. And pretty much we're still using that same system today. So if you think technology moving forward 26 years, and I think in the interim period, centrally we were promised a system that would be run by the entire country, exactly as you're saying, so that every force was talking to the same computer system. I think for a period of time that probably slowed down development within IT. That hasn't materialised, and so that's why we're now going on a more local basis and working in collaboration to try and get that IT up to where it should be.
It's not just policing,
No,
it's health, it's everywhere, But to me, IT systems are the absolute foundation of our infrastructure and how we need to work, and it's absolutely vital we get it right.
So we're on the case. We're going to take Graham and then the gentleman at the back.
I heard on the radio at lunchtime that there is no specific crime against a disabled person that actually would not be a crime if they were not disabled. The example they gave was a man who had learning difficulties and got himself a job in a factory and was happy with the colleagues and everything was going well. But he went on the first week to the pub and was told that they would take a round in turn, and he actually was the only person who paid for a group of people. And that apparently that is not a crime, it was suggested, and there would need to be legislation to make it a different crime, an action against a disabled person. I wonder if you, do you record that a disabled person has been
hate crime, talking about.
And Suffolk actually has got a really good network in relation to hate crime and how we deal with hate crime. I guess the absolute reassurance I'll give you is that, we've talked about this in terms of domestic abuse, there is no specific offence of domestic abuse. There's assault, there's a broad range of other offences that we can use, but it's that added that added part onto it as well. And there is a huge raft of legislation for us to use without knowing the individual circumstances. I don't know how that's been undertaken. But what does happen when something gets brought to our attention, that is flagged and is dealt with by somebody who's got, is monitored and looked at by somebody that's got specialisms in that area. And that's been commented on favourably by our Magistrates Inspector of Constabulary before as well. So within Suffolk, we've got good processes to make sure that we do address those issues.
I'm pleased to hear that.
And we do take it seriously, Graham.
Yeah,
surely. I remember speaking, there was a launch for hate crime over a year ago that I went to. And this is not a bit about being a nosy park, it's about decent, civilised behaviour and having a bit of respect. It's a central part of our police and crime plan. Respect for law and order, it actually says, I'll put that in there, and each other. Which means, in a tolerant society, you don't have to agree with people, you have the right to express yourself in any way, and having that respect, you have to be tolerant. You may find some people's views horrendous, but you've also got to respect the other person. So I hope you've got the balance about right.
But do you keep a statistic against
we've got some.
About people with a disability who have a crime system?
We've got a bit of an issue with the crime system, but do you want to?
One of the things we do locally in Bury is we send our Safer Neighbourhood team officers to places like the Info Bar, which is where people with learning difficulties do tend to gather. And one of the areas of work we've done locally is in relation to what's called mate crime, which is specifically for people who are vulnerable, where they have people befriending them and then asking them for money, probably in a similar way to what you describe. And it's just informing people that isn't an accepted practice. So it's just empowering people to understand that these people who are being their friends aren't necessarily there for their own, to benefit them. So it's about educating people and making sure that the Safer Neighbourhood team are accessible to those people, so they know that they have somewhere to turn if they are concerned about things. So we are doing that on a local basis as well.
And just to reassure you, the process that's used is we've got a computer system called Storm, which is our command and control system. So when you ring in and they create an incident for us to deal with, it gets logged on there. That has particular codes on it when you close it off, and they get flagged with somebody that monitors every single one that goes through. So they do keep a list of those incidents that are dealt with and the outcomes, and actually they're very, very proactive. And if that person thinks that the officer or member of staff hasn't dealt with it properly, they get a phone call that day to say, I've read this doesn't read right, what have you done? So it's actually immediate rectification if there's a problem, or if they haven't recorded it properly on there, it's amended on there as well. So it's a really rigorous system, and probably more so than a number of other crimes that could have taken place.
Pleased to hear this.
Just as a little comment, in our grant system for crime disorder reduction, we do support quite a lot of charities and voluntary sector organisations dealing with people with mental health or disabilities to try and make sure their plight, which most of us would never wish to be in that position, is actually recognised and worked with. So thank you very much for raising it. The gentleman at the back, first, I believe, if I remember correctly.
I shall stand, it's good for my back.
Okay.
You said something that I thought was rather telling,
Right.
that the same issues keep coming up at the meetings. This suggests to me that you're not dealing with these issues. And one particularly was visible policing.
Yeah.
Now I spend about 5 hours a week in Bury St Edmunds shopping, and yesterday, or was it Tuesday, for the first time for weeks I actually saw a uniformed officer. In fact, there were two. I believe one was a trainee. And that is unusual. I can drive to Felixstowe, stay there a while and come back, and not see a traffic car.
Oh.
Now, we want to see the police. You may not want us to want to see the police, but we do, and it goes back to we feel safer. So why do these issues keep coming up? They're not dealing with them.
Well, with greatest respect, so I think that's slightly wider than I know why you said, and I quite understand what you're saying. So if that's what you feel, clearly that is what you feel. Could I just say that Suffolk is only one of only 2 forces we've actually expanded roads policing. I'm very, very keen on that. It may not be enough to satisfy all your needs, I understand that, but please remember, compared with others, we're ahead of the curve on that. As regards physical policing, what I've said to Gareth is, and we've had that commitment tonight, of maintaining that Safer Neighbourhood team here in Suffolk. And you need to know that we've got about 1,150, 1,160 police officers, which is, that's the case, but please remember the changing pattern of crime as well. It's not all about being in uniform on the front, and I did say earlier, it's how do we get the balance right to reassure you, as a resident, a taxpayer and everything else, quite understand where you're coming from. The changing pattern of crimes, we have resources that are only so big, and I'm not grumbling about that. That's why we are looking at every single possible way to try and maintain, as I said earlier, that frontline visible policing. I know you're not going to be satisfied with that. Can I give you another example where we've listened to the public to make a difference? One of the issues that comes up, apart from parking, the other one that comes up, and I'll bring it up so nobody else has to, and that's the issue of speeding. Be it in towns, in villages, residential areas, there are some complete nutcases out there who think it's funny to whiz through a 30-mile limit at 50, 60 or even higher speeds than that. You've seen some of the high-profile cases on the A40 and A140, but believe you me, the Constabulary has changed its policy of enforcement on the back of the survey that we organised 2 years ago. We had over 2,000 responses, and that means that if you're not satisfied with the response to enforcement, you can put it through the Safer Neighbourhood team to make sure there is enforcement in your area. You can contact me directly. We will put it through into the system. That is a complete step change in where it was before. I know it doesn't satisfy everybody. The Constabulary, Gareth, Jane, everybody knows it isn't enough. But the key to that is, what is it about people who don't behave properly? Come back to what I said about sentencing guidelines. One case, I think it was on the A14 where he was doing, I don't know, 118 or whatever it was, he got banned for 6 months. That is a joke. He should have been banned for 6 years, in my view. The message doesn't support these guys. I was furious. I can say that, these guys can't. And I said so at the time. So, yes, it's work in progress, and I'm not trying to gloss it over. I understand exactly where you're coming from. But we've got to make sure the guys are productive, doing what they can to deal with crimes as they happen and prevent it. But the reassurance I fully accept, and that is something that we talk about, well, I suppose, all the time.
Can I come back on
Of course.
Last August, I sent you an email regarding the speed of lorries on the A14,
Yep.
and I got a very quick reply from a sergeant at Martlesham, whose name began with M, but I didn't make a note of it.
Right.
And he said he was very busy. He had the brief from you to deal with this to myself, and he would ring me in September.
And
Nothing.
well,
Send me the email.
that is completely unacceptable.
Right.
That's not what I expected my staff to do.
I've-
If you send me the email, I'll have a look at it.
For years, decades, the lorries have been speeding at 56 to 58, the limiter, and yet the speed limit for lorries was, last August, 50 miles an hour. The lorries have been untroubled by the police. They have failed completely to bring the lorries down to 50 miles an hour. And I recently discovered in a minute piece in the paper that the solution that's come up with, including, I presume, the police agree, the lorries now have a legal limit of 60 miles an hour. So they've solved it. The lorries have won. Might is right, and I bet there's not many people in this room now know that the speed limit on the A14 for lorries has been raised from 50 to 60. And when are you going to stop lorries overtaking?
Well, I'll answer your question, and I'll just cover it from a couple of perspectives. First of all, I get a lot of complaints from people that say we over-enforce speed on the A14.
Say again?
I get a lot of complaints from people that say we over-enforce, so we do too much enforcement
Not
on the
lorries.
A14. And in addition to that, in terms of the A14 and its importance, actually, Tim and I have had a really long discussion in relation to this. I know and I agree and I work with Tim because that is absolutely vital for Suffolk's prosperity to ensure that we have the A14 that not only is safe but is free flowing and actually is a road where container lorries can go and we want them to go safely. In terms of overtaking, where they are permitted to overtake, they can overtake. If there is no prohibition on them overtaking, then I cannot, and my staff cannot enforce it. But if there are areas where it is prohibited, then it is something that we can have a look at. So, in answer to your question, the A14 is absolutely vital. Yes, we do loads of enforcement. My traffic officers...
You didn't enforce the 50 mile an hour limit.
Well, I'm telling you, we do enforce... I'm telling you that whatever the speed is on the A14 in terms of cars, in terms of lorries, in terms of vans, then a lot of enforcement is done.
If you go back on your records, I'd be astonished if you could show me where you prosecuted a driver, a HGV driver, or say 56 to 58 mile an hour. It just did not happen. That was their regular speed and they were untroubled by the police.
I can't hypothesise now. I think, I've said what I've said in relation to what we're doing.
And I've been on some undercover operations that are being done actually to enforce, and it's not the speed, mobile phone use, all sorts of things. I've actually seen it.
Can
You may not agree,
The
but
speed limit's been raised for lorries.
Well, but
You've
that's
solved
not
the problem.
yeah,
Can I take an alternative view?
yes, of course.
If all lorries were kept to 50 miles an hour, we would not be
And
able
any
to travel
overtaking.
as well as we do at present. If they are going at 60 miles an hour, they are part of the traffic problem.
My whole philosophy around the A14, following the discussions with Tim, is to keep it safe and keep it free flowing. Tim has invested extra staff, an extra vehicle on the A14. We're currently doing a bit of work to make sure there's coverage up this end as well, and we are going to continue to make this an absolute priority because it's vital for our county, for our prosperity.
But could we not have this overtaking ban? They don't need to overtake it. They're so bored they indulge in this, what I call lorry racing.
Well, the trouble all goes back actually, and that we do not have the power to do that. The trouble all goes back to when the A14 was dual. I can remember when I was a boy when it came through the middle of Bury, Newmarket, Cambridge, Woolpit, Hawley Bend, where you had to stop middle of Stowmarket, can you believe, with 2 lorries up on the pavement?
Yeah.
And the reality is, it should have been a motorway, it isn't, and we are on a sodding heck of a muddle here.
Best word you've said this evening.
But it is not, and we can't, so we have got a lot of work we're doing with the Highways Agency, now called Highways England, who are the most recalcitrant, boneheaded bunch of people I've ever come across, which does my head in, but we're not going to give up. They have got to put the investment in all sorts of proper lorry parks, facilities for lorry drivers. They are, to some extent, whether we like it or not. That Felixstowe port brings in a huge amount of wealth to the country. The A14 is critical. You've only got to look at facilities here in Bury, your brewing industry, sugar beet, British sugar.
How are we going to stop these lorries overtaking?
Well, I don't know that we can stop lorries overtaking because that is not.
Do you know they've tried it out elsewhere as well, and it hasn't worked.
What happened?
And elsewhere in Essex as well, and it hasn't worked that well.
No.
Why?
Because it hasn't solved any problems.
You've
You know,
also,
Well, if the lorries are all doing the same speed, 56, 58,
Yeah.
then where's the
They
problem?
don't. Someone goes slower.
I
Cause a
suggest-
tailback. You know, there are some real issues with it.
yeah, and there are. It's not a motorway, and that's part of the problem. So we have to balance it. I mean,
The only
really.
time you could do anything about it, I feel, is if there's specific hours at the
Yeah.
peak traffic period,
Yeah.
people going to work or coming home, but how you would enforce that, you know.
I will, if you leave me your details, I will talk to them when we have our next meeting with the Highways England people, which I think is next month. I'll let you know what they say. They're the ones who actually deal with it, and if you're not satisfied with that, the best thing to do is talk to the
But
Department of
why was
Transport.
the 60 mile an hour limit introduced in such a whisper?
Shall I tell you? I think you'll find it was European legislation.
I didn't even know.
I'll rest my case there. I don't want to start a debate on that.
I thought it
So-
always was 60.
Yeah, exactly right.
I honestly thought it was 60 on
Yeah.
Well,
Deal
it is.
Carriageway and things.
No, not for lorries it wasn't originally, no. No, vans. Anyway, but I do take your point. So, down here.
We live in a village, and I would say that there's certain of us who try and make ourselves the eyes and ears.
Yeah.
Now, we have a rural watch scheme that runs as a voluntary alongside the police. And question I've asked is, number one, why does it take an average of 4 to 5 days on Police Connect, used to be Direct, to be notified of incidents? And I've got them on my phone at the
Yeah,
moment.
yeah.
Things happened last Friday, I got them on Wednesday. It makes it impossible to be the eyes and ears when something's happened in an adjoining village and we can't take action.
Okay.
Number two,
Yeah, that's
related.
Yeah.
It doesn't bother me too much personally, but I have colleagues who work with me on this and they do resent paying 15p for a 101 call.
Right.
So they have on occasions taken a 999. Now whether it makes any difference or not, I'm not quite sure, because it probably goes to the same room anyway. But surely it's a deterrent to charge for making a service call, which should help the authorities.
Yeah.
And the third thing related is why, after notifying the police of certain incidents, there's no closure. We do not get told. It may be policy, but I do feel that we would like to know what the outcome is. Whether there's no outcome, they've left the scene, or yes, we've caught them, or we will be following it up. Often nothing happens at all.
Okay, I'll get Gareth to answer that from the operational perspective. Just a general point before he answers that. I entirely agree with you. If we're going to use technology, the whole point of it is to be very timely and get on with it and make sure it's dealt with immediately, particularly if we're there for preventing crime. Fully understand that. So we certainly need to look at that. The other comment about paying for it, I don't know actually what the figures would be, but we can have a look. Whether I don't know what the cost would be.
Charges, it's not permanent charges,
Yeah.
it's a one-off charge.
so Gareth can give you the answer. The other thing about closure of incidents, I entirely agree with you. A few years ago, before I was elected, we had about 5,000 quid's worth of kit stolen down the yard, and I'll tell you exactly what happened. Someone came out, here's the crime number, forensic crime came along and suggested it might have been various travelling people who perhaps did this, and that's all we ever heard. And that isn't good enough. People need closure, even if you don't get a result. And I get these complaints every now and again that come into our office. I had a chap who I knew some years ago had a motorbike stolen, not from around here. He'd actually taken the trouble to, there was a mobile phone on it, and someone traced to where the phone was last. It was up somewhere in Norfolk. That wasn't followed up, which is unforgivable. So we have to work hard to make sure that if the public are helping the constabulary, that it's recognised. And one of the things is bringing closure to an incident. Even if you don't get the result, at least you know X, Y and Z has been done, but unfortunately, or whatever it is, you haven't got it. But being left dangling in midair is actually no good to anyone. So we'll definitely take that forward, Gareth. So what can you say about that?
Yeah, first of all, in terms of police director, it's the first time that anybody's raised the fact with me it's not timely. So I will take that away and have a look at it for you, because that does cause me some concern. In relation to the 999 versus 101, 101 was brought in to simplify how you could contact the police. And it did come in nationally, and it's as you say, 15p, not per minute, but 15p one-off charge. That is instead of the per minute billing that you'd have got on a normal call, and therefore, is adjudicated to be fair in terms of the cost. So it's not something that makes us money. It's not like the 08 numbers, which some other public services used. It's a one-off fee to allow you to contact us really directly. We see no money in relation to that at all, so that doesn't come in. What I'd say is, if you make 999 calls instead of a 101 thinking they're free, that could actually, I'm saying everybody knows, that could really impact upon a threat to life that somebody would have, and is therefore to be avoided at all costs. The last point you make is actually, as Tim says, it's not acceptable that you don't get an update. But what I would say is the constabulary's worked really, really hard over the last couple of years in terms of that specific issue. And people that are satisfied with our service is at the upper 80% now. I'm not saying that's acceptable, because clearly there's still that sort of like 10, 11, 12% of people that we need to make sure that we do deal with that are satisfied. But on your occasion, we didn't do it right, we didn't give that information back to you. But in the vast majority of occasions, and at an increasing level, people are coming back to us and saying, thank you, actually the service you provided us was really good, you did keep us updated, and we didn't know what had happened. So, generally, things are looking better. On your particular occasion, it wasn't what I'd expected my staff to do.
Yeah. I mean, just an example, when there were particular vehicles acting suspiciously, we made the relevant call and impressed on the fact that they were still in the vicinity. Had action been taken quickly, now I know you can say it's 20 minutes to get to us. We realise in Chedworth it could be 20 minutes, especially if they're in Clare.
Yeah.
But the vehicle was in the village, we impressed it on them, we gave them registration number, they weren't apprehended. 2 months later, and I'm a volunteer for Trading Standards as well, that same type of vehicle, selling as it happened, if you can use the word reconditioned beds, if there's such a thing, they were taking old beds, recovering them and selling them as new. Now we knew what was going on and we reported this fact, but 2 months later Trading Standards notified us that if we get any information on this type of operation, could we let the police know? Now 2 months before, we had let the police know. Nothing happened, there was no call out. If they did come, they didn't tell us they'd come out, which is why I'm relating to the open end. So, we could have been stopped.
It is letting you know, because actually we solve so many crimes because of information that does come in. And I agree with you, we don't always get that information back, but actually, we've got a heap of staff that sit behind the scenes that bring all the information in together, work really closely with Trading Standards as well. We do have really good links in with Trading Standards that sits down and brings all that intelligence together. So don't ever think that your call will be wasted. It's the letting you know what we've done with it that's important to me, because it's there. Once you've called in, it's on the system, it's there, and it's researchable for our staff to use.
Can I ask another question which is not related to that? One of your board, you mentioned the community behaviour orders, and it would be interesting to know what they actually do, because I think I see them at Horringer Church now and again. Is that the case? Are they?
Well, the community behaviour order is specifically against an individual, and so as in with the old antisocial behaviour orders. So, for example, within the town centre, we've got people who are prolific shoplifters, so they can have a banning notice to prevent them from being in a particular area, to actually prevent them from committing crime within that area. And that has also occurred on individuals in some of the rural locations who are causing a nuisance within a particular village. They have this notice served on them, so to prevent them getting to the stage where they are knocking on people's door for money or causing a nuisance by going into people's gardens or anything, the banning notice is that they are not allowed into that village, and so if we see them at that point, they can be detained to prevent any further disruption to that local community. But the positive thing with the difference between antisocial behaviour orders and these criminal behaviour orders is that on top of that, it's not just telling somebody they can't do something, it's also saying to somebody that they need to do something. So you can also, on top of that, for example, if the shoplifting within the town is in relation to alcohol or substance misuse, you could be also asking to put in place that they have to attend specific meetings in order to address those issues. So actually, at the end of the day, it's not just hounding somebody out and stopping them from doing something, it's actually trying to address their offending behaviour to make an improvement for the future. So that's what those particular orders are in relation to.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay, thank you for raising that. John, did you have a question?
Yeah, sorry.
You're about poised. Just explain, ladies and gentlemen, while John is very kindly a volunteer who's doing this for absolutely nothing, filming these proceedings, and they'll be parked up on the website as soon as we get it downloaded. If you wish to see the whole event all over again, we'll put snippets of it. So there we are. Anyway, John.
Well, I'm also a St Edmundsbury Borough Councillor as
Yes.
well, so
Yes.
this is that hat on, if you like. Jane actually took some of my thunder away about parking decriminalisation, so I won't go on too much about it. In Hayview, I think we have even higher parking issues on one street. In 8 months, we've had over 900 tickets issued in a space of 200 yards, so that's, that's a bit. But I understand from my colleague, who's a Suffolk County Councillor, he had a meeting a couple of days ago, that he told me that all the district councils in Suffolk, bar St Edmundsbury, have agreed to the concept of decriminalisation. So it's something I'm going to have to look into why we're not doing it. Because they told us about 4 or 5 months ago that within 18 months at that point, they would have this all done, which would naturally relieve, quite correctly, the police from having to be a glorified traffic warden. So that's one thing. The other thing that came up yesterday is in Haverhill, where I live, there's a master plan being developed at the moment, which is basically for the next 20, 30 years how the town's going to develop. It's going to increase in size by 40%, probably become bigger than Bury St Edmunds as well. And I'll put me Haverhill Town Council hat on that, as I'm a councillor of that as well. One of the things that came up is a proposal in that master plan, which is going to be discussed by St Edmundsbury Cabinet next week, to abandon the police station in Haverhill. I'm glad you're looking there within the next 2 to 5 years. And this came to us as an astounding thing. I don't think anyone's actually been consulted about it, but somebody somewhere has obviously suggested this, and it's become residential, but it doesn't mention anything about potentially where it would go. Now I know it's in its perfect position in Haverhill, where it is. In fact, it probably needs to be more used, as you mentioned earlier on, about more blue light services. I just wondered if you had any comments on that.
Yeah, I certainly do. The way the estate is run now, we have a property portfolio, ladies and gentlemen, worth about £30 million with various properties apart from the custody suites, but that's a separate story which we won't go into, done under a private finance initiative, which is not necessarily the best value for the taxpayer by a long way, but that's what we inherited. Yes, we are about to start a major estates review looking at public access, community safety, as well as the budgetary process, and all of these things need to be knitted together. You can't do these things in isolation. Really important that everybody understands that. On your behalf, the PCC, if you like, is the guardian, the custodian of the estate, so anything that's disposed or purchased or whatever, I have to decide on your behalf. But the issue here is that if there are master plans, then they obviously need to come and talk to us. Nobody has come and spoken to me about it, and I'm not aware that they've spoken to anybody in the Estates Department. Now, I'm not saying yes or no, it depends what they want to do. It's quite right that it's a big police station in Haverhill. It is underutilised. One of the reasons for this big change is that with the custody suites, there are quite a lot of cell blocks in the most of the police stations that are now no longer used. So I hope you will understand that you're still paying rates, insurance and other on-cost maintenance costs that frankly are not any longer required. So we need to look at that. Whether that will be part of the overall solution, we need to look at what the options are, but nobody's come and spoken to me about it. So you can tell them if they want to, there are the cards, get on the phone and come and see us.
And when we talk about public access, you know, we talk about how people can access our services, and we've said that part of public access will be some form of ability to have local access as well. So, you know, however that looks, it will be local access, but Tim's quite right, you know, solutions come up, but nothing's come across my desk which talks about it.
And if you look at Milton Hall, maybe you could have one practitioner for 6 or 7 organisations that could give that front of desk help instead of everybody having their own. And that's a balmy system, costs a fortune and isn't necessary. Coming back to the point of preserving frontline policing as opposed to having someone sat behind a desk. So we've got to look at all these methods.
Okay.
So perhaps you pass that on to them. I'm sure you'll
Will
do.
do.
Good. Any other questions, ladies and gentlemen? Right. Well, thank you very much indeed for your attendance. Just before we close, I just want to, our friend Mr. Gooch has brought these along. Would you like to just say a couple of brief words?
These are stickers, window stickers. They don't say neighbourhood watch, they say neighbourhoods watching, and it's got the meerkats logo on them. It's supplied through the National Neighbourhood Watch, but it's supporting the comparethemarket.com. So you would expect you could trim them to fit just around if you want, but it's up to you what you do with them. I'm just trying to get them out so people see it from a distance and get confused and think there's an open watch there. So they push off.
Absolutely.
And vicious meerkats.
So thanks for that. And if you want to take a contact card, please come and help yourself. I only have one mobile and you can ring it whenever you like. But try not to do it at 3 o'clock in the morning. Well, thank you very much indeed. Thank you to John for filming it, and thank you to the guys for coming along, and of course lastly thank you very much for your input. Very interesting. Thank you.